Welcome back to a special week of Kodsnack. Yes, it's Öredev Debrief Week again. During this year's Öredev conference, I once again got the opportunity to have a short on-stage chat with each of the keynote speakers. And this year we have a total of 6 keynotes and no less than 8 speakers to go through. So, it's going to be a full week. And one of the ways I think about these interviews is as giving a taste of the hallway track. What can it be like to catch the keynote speakers between presentations and get to pick their brains a bit about both topics inside of the keynote and outside of it? So if you have heard the presentations, you'll have quite a bit more context, but you could also see our chats as a sort of appetizer for the full thing. So this first interview is with Corin Ism. We talked right after she had given her keynote presentation titled The Era of the Virtual World Builder, more or less about the power we as developers have to change the world for the better. Not a bad thing, not at all. Corin describes herself on her website as a governance futurist and writer. And to try and sum up her words in my words, Corin thinks and talks about the architectures of power, that is, how we build structures for making and enforcing decisions, which, when you think about it, is pretty much what we do all day, every day as software developers. There's a lot more information on her website and, of course, in the keynote itself. And all of this can, of course, be found in the episode notes, as usual. Big thanks to Öredev for inviting Kodsnack again. They paid for the trip and the editing time of these keynote recordings, but they have absolutely no say about the content of the episodes. All right, over to the stage. Welcome to the podcast stage, Corin.
Thank you.
And thank you for a very thought-provoking keynote. I'm not sure where to start, but it feels to me like one part of it, at least, is sort of a call to action to us developers to basically use all the power we have in the world today to do good, do better. Is that a fair starting point?
Definitely a fair starting point. I think concretely it's thinking about what we're building. If we're building products, it sounds so demure. It doesn't sound that important.
No.
But then when you add up that the products that we're able to build actually are the entirety of the value proposition of a state, then suddenly talking about connecting the dots, when you connect that together, it's like, oh, these aren't inconsequential products.
No.
These add up to a challenge to the way that we've been doing statecraft for millennia.
Yeah.
And no one is really in charge of that. And maybe no one should be.
Yeah.
But we definitely should start experimenting with more narrative backing when we understand that what we're building has these consequences.
Yeah.
And so then suddenly trapping users into a certain social experience, or it's actually about where they will live.
Yeah.
And we tend to, when we're talking about city planning, have a very high bar for what we should be allowed to do, what kind of values should be respected. But then when we do it virtually, it's like, it doesn't really matter. But I would contend it matters more.
Yeah. And it's like, the previous website did this thing, so we'll just do pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
And of course, when I filter out this stuff, but I thought it was really interesting that you mentioned that interfaces are basically the law in a virtual world.
They are.
Which is frustrating.
Yes.
and terrible and very true.
Yeah.
And I feel like we pretty much never talk about that actively in the things we build. I mean, sometimes someone comes in from outside and looks at a social media website or something and see all the power they have and all the things they filter out, but it's not something we do enough, I think, day to day. I mean, I know I definitely don't.
And I think often then we talk about the algorithm as if it was some kind of rain god to pray to. But I think the interface discussion is even more interesting. Because things like, for example, anonymity has often been pointed out that the culprit, saying that that is what makes people behave in a non-civil way and so on. But we see that there are experiments when if you design an interface to just ask simple questions about, for example, rating other people's comments for whether or not they are civil or not, it changes the behavior of the user right away. So when we think about anonymity, it's as if we are assuming that a human is one and the same. And we're not. We're very different depending on the interface we're filtered through.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if we want people to be good to each other or generous, we can build an interface that will premiere those actions.
Yeah.
And if we break down the interface, it is to an extent about just which actions you're allowed to do, but it is also about the reputation system or whatever you are scored at. I have this huge document with a couple of 100 scores that people have lived by in different societies. And depending on the score, you get completely different worlds.
Yeah.
So if you would be, right now, we're very often scored on net worth or how much money, what we can pay for.
Yeah.
Money is the big score in our
success.
society. Exactly. And we have scores like the Chinese credit score that has tried to also make you, get points and get access to things in society based on how good you are as a Chinese citizen, essentially. Or what they would like you to be as a citizen.
Yeah.
And we have scores that relate to sustainability or companies that are now being scored on the, for example, ESG has been largely influential because it is a score tied to access. And we could tie how generous you are to your friends to a score and then tie access to that.
Yeah.
And so the interface, when we start to unpack it, is several governance tools in one.
Yeah. I think it's really good to talk about it as an interface as well, because that's a good reminder to me as a developer that this is something I can change.
Yeah.
I can adjust it. But it's also, in a way, it's kind of scary, because now you made me realize how much power I have that I should be using for something. And if I do use it, I have even more responsibility. By the feel of it. I still have it now, even though I don't use it.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's dangerous to think you don't have power, because then suddenly you don't.
Yeah, in a way, it's like every developer is building a maze for the user
Yes.
as rats
Yeah.
to run in. And that's always been the case. But now we're at this point where we know enough about where the tech neo-feudal order sort of pushes us, which is away from the democratic values that we said were so important when it comes to physical governance. And so I think at this point we can start to mature in that power and not just feel that we are evil puppet masters, but more how can we empower the user to make actions that take them where they want to go.
Yeah.
So if the user wants to be, as many people do, they want to learn things, they want to have friendships, they want to have connections, they want to reach the potential of their hopes and dreams. What would an interface look like that attempts to help them with that?
Yeah.
And it ties into end-user programming,
Yeah.
because as AI will enable people who aren't developers to actually code, you can also think people who today find it to be too high of a barrier to learn and actually become like a full-blown developer in our era, but in 5 years or maybe even 3 years, they could be the ones that also help in creating the interfaces they want.
Yeah, and then see, even more people have even more to think about when it comes to the interfaces we build.
Yeah.
So I guess the next question that comes up to my mind is where do I start? How do I start getting this mindset into my day-to-day work?
I think it depends on what you're working on right now. Because if you are, for example, providing something that is an entertainment experience, that is still like a practice for if it's something where people are interacting with other people, it's a way of cultivating generosity or whatever values you want to embrace. So I think start where you are and just using this way of thinking about that you are creating people, not just interfaces. It's like this, you build the buildings, then the buildings build us. And these are the virtual buildings. And we live virtual lives. So that, I think, is the first thought, just looking at what you're doing right now through this lens. And then I think many developers are such creative people that, just starting to apply this way of thinking when you are seeing, for example, the election results are coming out and then saying, okay, there will be a huge discussion now on reproductive rights, of course. But can you conceive of things like abortion beyond the nation state?
Yeah.
And what would that look like?
Yeah.
How can a developer aid someone who is trying to get access to health care? 10 years they couldn't do much. Yeah. But today, more and more, like to do diagnostic tests, more and more of what a doctor does is accessible through virtual means. Yeah. And then the question is, what remains physical? Possibly at this point, an abortion pill that can be sent across state lines.
Yeah.
It's like a whole way of thinking about what can I supply to people who are living in a place where what they want or need is not being supplied by the government anymore.
Yeah. What can I do in my little corner to sort of provide more? Yeah. I guess the other thing I would be excited about is how do I find like interesting examples of people doing good stuff? Because I assume they're out there and I just don't know about them because I haven't known to ask the question yet.
I would say that, this is such an evolving field that the best way is to, some people market it as, I'm doing virtual nations.
Yeah.
But so far, to a large extent, those have been crypto scams.
Yeah.
So that's, of course, not ideal. Whereas people who are not talking about it, but doing it, tend to be in gaming. So it is looking at what does this game allow people to do in terms of collaboration, in terms of going on quests, which is, again, all of it is hunting for emotions.
Yeah.
So like looking at each game from a governance perspective, what are people incentivized to do? How are they incentivized to treat each other? And how complex collaboration is possible? Yeah. And if you want to know that, you can ask ChatGPT to break it down for each game. Yeah. So that's very useful.
Get the ideas.
Exactly.
Or start catching the ideas.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting. You mentioned, the evil puppet master before. We don't really have a positive side version of the evil puppet master. It's just the evil puppet master, and then we think there's nothing on the other side. Yeah. But we are doing the exact same things, or should be doing, but maybe we're sort of trying to, abdicate our responsibility or something. It's that we're on the good side. We don't affect people.
I love that you say that, because I think it's so true. The idea that it somehow is less of an offense to not do something. I think it's the biggest offense to have power and not use it. Yeah. And there has been so much discussion about privilege, and to me it's like privilege is just a synonym for responsibility. So if you have a lot of privilege, if you have a lot of power, that means you also have a call to action to use it. But you don't have to use it to tell other people what to do. You can use it by building something where they get to decide for themselves. Yeah. So if you take something like liquid democracy, for example, most people have never even heard about that term, but the idea is that when we envision the sort of ancient Greece and all the men that weren't slaves gathering around and voting for things on a daily basis, more or less, they could do that because they had slaves that did the labor, so they had time. Yeah. But secondly, it was a small city-state, so it was physically possible. And then we tend to describe the evolution of governance as saying that we went into representative democracy because the room got too full of people and not everyone could have a say. But liquid democracy then says, actually, you can have the right to express your opinion all the time, and then virtually on an interface you can give away that vote to someone who's an expert or to a representative on a daily basis. So sort of like if you imagine it like a phone app that gives you notifications every time the parliament is voting, and then you can direct vote if you feel like it or not, because that story about we ran out of space in the auditorium, that's just not accurate anymore. But we kept with that model even when it stopped being accurate.
Sort of a more a more direct, dynamic party system.
Exactly.
I trust this person's opinion for this question. So
for
they
just
have
that question.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So for this, you have my.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
Can we do that soon?
Yeah, and there are, like, for example, there was a Partido de la Red, I think they were called, in Argentina, who was a party where if you voted for their representative, it was an app. So the person was just there to do what the people on the app said. So there's been, and again, but they are like novelty things here and there. It's never reached this point of momentum for the discussion but I also think that's because we are just at the verge of the entire value proposition of the state being virtual, except for arguably sewage systems and trash.
Yeah.
Those, that's what the state still
would like to remove them and make them virtual, but it's kind of difficult. A quick but huge thank you to everyone sponsoring us on Coffee. You too can become one of them by surfing to ko-fi.com/kodsnack Kodsnack, and giving us either a one-time donation or monthly support. If you support us on the coffee drinker level of €5 per month or more, you get a bunch of very nice stickers in your actual physical mailbox. And if you support us on the barista level for €10 per month or more, you also get a thank you right here. Big thanks to Albin Groen, Svante Richter, Anders Legell, Brother Ingo, and Tobbe Lundberg. Everyone who supports us helps make the podcast possible, and the more of you there are, the better we can make the podcast. We do sometimes have sponsors, but it's actually your support which is making it possible to cover our monthly costs. And if you want to support us in other ways, you can, of course, give the podcast a review in your podcast player. That also helps a lot. Give it a thumbs up, a star, write a comment, or whatever your player supports. Or, of course, simply tell someone who might like the podcast about an episode. And remember, you're a fantastic person, whether you support us or not. I mean, it also felt so true when you said, like, it's Plato and then the rest is footnotes. And that's it rings kind of true, and it's also kind of depressing because it means that we sort of have decided that, the stuff they came up with, that's sort of finished.
Yeah,
and now we're just puttering along on top, and this is the best we can do. Sorry, that's so depressing. But I mean, there are counterexamples. And I mean, I remember when I started listening to the musical Hamilton about the American Revolution, and suddenly getting that feel for it, like they were figuring stuff out, they were making stuff up.
Yeah.
And they didn't expect that to stop either. This is our current attempt. This is what we're working with. Exactly. This is what we're trying to do. And it's full of contradictions. And now we're looking at it like, they wrote this. This is surely like the letter of the law.
Exactly. It's like for developers, I think the word iteration is very key. Yeah. We iterate and then we keep iterating, except when it comes to governance. Yeah. Personally, I don't find that depressing as much as I find it like we can be at this moment of awakening because of how likely it is for AI to disrupt our economic model. This is like one of those situations where there will be the request for ideas. Yeah. So people who are thinking about this now have a chance at having those ideas realized. Yeah. But also we can realize them ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
we don't have to ask for either permission or forgiveness.
No,
we can just
everything
do it.
is changing. I shouldn't just sit around and wait for someone to ask me. I should be doing something, I guess.
And unlike Hamilton or the people who are featured there, what they did has it has continued consequences for people's lives. Yeah. Like I started talking about that a world is the boundaries for our lives. And we live within the boundaries that people who fought about things hundreds and sometimes thousands of years ago fought up. So why aren't we thinking about our own lives like that? Yeah. It tends to be because we think it's futile, that it's just too big, it's never going to happen. And that's why I think it's so interesting to conceive of it. Well, actually, everyone who's here, I don't know how many people are here, maybe 4,000, 2,000? Yeah. 2,000, well, we could do a lot. Like, we are a small society here and now. So if we create an interface where people here can bring out their ideas, we take over this building, we start growing urban gardens, whatever it is. It's like, it doesn't have to be a matter of overthrowing what is. We can sandbox things. And we're in Sweden right now, which is, I come from Sweden originally, and I've said that the only thing that would bring me back to live in Sweden is if I get to do sandbox experience in the ghost towns in the north to try different governance systems because we have so much land. Yeah. And so, but I don't have to wait for the Swedish government to ask me to do that, to do it virtually. And neither do you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So it's... I like the expression opt-in the nations that you
exactly. Yes. And the funny thing is, when it comes to very wealthy people and also religious people, to a large extent, we're already living like that.
Yeah.
Like very wealthy people tend to have very special credit cards.
Yeah.
And if you have a certain level of a credit card, you have a concierge service where wherever you go in the world, you can call them and ask for anything you might want. And you will have that secured. So you are living above the idea of these bordered nations.
Yeah.
You are part of the wealth nation.
Yeah.
And so that possibility could be there in other ways for all citizens.
Yeah.
And we see it like when you're traveling in the EU, you have that little card that allows you to access healthcare in different places.
Yeah.
That's a part of the virtual offering that when we take that one step into technology, deeper, then we don't have to visit the actual hospital.
Yeah.
But it's the same idea of wherever I travel, I have an insurance system, but I am not tied to the physical place where I was born. The insurance system is of a global constitution.
Yeah, it's available around me. I feel like this is the kind of optimism I needed after.
I'm sorry if No, I think it does have an arc to realize responsibility.
Yeah.
It feels heavy until you start to make sense of it for who you are.
Yeah.
So it's like there is that the truth will set you free, but first it's going to piss you off.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's your responsibility will make you feel heavy until you find how to use it.
Yeah.
And then having responsibility and doing something. I think when it comes to, a lot of people talk about being very depressed when watching the news. And I think the one thing that makes you less depressed when seeing what's going on in the world is knowing that you're doing something or you're trying to do something. Yeah. And right now it's been so much about, okay, I'm creating something that is very focused on, it's very narrow. That's how we think of consumer goods. That's how we think of what we can offer. But we can also create structures, virtual structures. And as abstract as that is when you think about it first, it's also very concrete. It's just like an interface where people can go to make decisions together and collaborate. It's like Trello.
Yeah.
You know, it is Trello.
Yeah.
But for, not for a company, but for people who want to collaborate on anything.
Yeah, it's exciting. Do we have a few more minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, because I had another completely side thing that I saw when I was researching a bit on your website.
Yeah.
And you talked about taking a long period of time and basically disconnecting to focus on working on deep work, and that's a concept that I'm really intrigued about. So I would like to hear a little more about that your process of working there.
Sure. Yeah. It was, I think. It really changed my brain. Just like being on social media all the time changes our brains to shorten our attention spans and things like that. I knew that in order to think about these things in a more substantial way, I had to no longer care about relevance. I no longer could care about... I think that's such a crazy demand on all of us that we're supposed to perform life and not just live it. And it's so draining. And so because these are very tricky subjects, and I knew like I will have to stretch myself to the very end of my capacity to do it, I just couldn't afford to be a part of that anymore. And it was like I had to really go through ego death, you know, and that was nice. On the other side, I got way calmer and happier and all those things that... but right now, I think many people equate being online with all those horrible expectations of performance. And that's not the internet. That is just the interfaces that we've gotten used to. So the possibility to feel and to think the way I've been able to feel and think during when I've been writing these books that are coming out and so on, that during... Like all of that is possible in virtual worlds. It's just not in the virtual worlds that we're using and where we hang out right now.
It's not the ones that people are talking about or shouting about the most. And so, for example, this Slow Internet manifesto that we released a couple of months ago, a lot of people see that and they think, oh, that's so lovely. I don't have to use the internet anymore. This is like anti-internet, and it's the opposite. It's like the most pro-internet, but internet that we don't have right now. So we don't have it at all? So is it more of a direction we should be going in?
I think so. And I think here and there we see it. Like all the time you have attempts at from everything. Like have you seen this little bunny camera that came out that allows you only to record video and audio, and became such a hit because I spoke to developer of this, and he talked about that he had been writing down his relationship to his phone in bullet points, and he realized that if this had been a relationship to a person, he would have broken up immediately because it was so like, yes, it's nice, but it's also really bad. And, you know, my goals, I'm distracted from what I really want in life and all of those things. So essentially these like single purpose devices, things like that, I think are picking up, because there you have an interface also in the hardware that commands you to just do what you wanted to do. This everything at the touch of your fingertip sounded so cool, but also was really a distraction.
So how did you like set up strict rules for yourself when you did that period, or how did you go
concretely I pretty much I never said I'm going to leave now. I've seen people say that, and then they come back 2 days later. Kind of thing.
Exactly.
So it was a gradual, like less and less, and taking away the apps and stuff like that. So over time, just getting out of the habit in the same way as you get into a habit, and then falling in love with the work. That's always, I think, nicer when you start to love something more than the thing that's not good for you. That's a more pleasant way than like stopping something cold turkey.
So a nice and gradual thing.
Yes, and now I'm supposed to return to it, and that feels very strange. And I'm also not sure which platforms I actually want to return to.
No.
At this point, it's like you have to be on LinkedIn to be a professional person, but at the same time, the culture that exists there is, in a word, very cringe. You know, and
a good summary.
And it doesn't at all feel like, but you want to be, it's like the Little Mermaid would sing, like, I want to be where the people are.
Exactly.
Like, that's where people are. So what I love to see right now happening is influencers leading an exodus from certain platforms. You see it on Twitter or X with Blue Sky, and more, especially people in the tech field who are saying, okay, we are leaving. We're going to Blue Sky now. And I think that's how it has to be. It's like, influencers means that they can influence people to do the shift. So talking about people who are powerful in the virtual world, like at one point YouTube had just like a couple of thousand of people who were creating so much of the content. If they would have just teamed together and gone into their own platform, they would have owned that platform now, which we see talking about positive examples in platform cooperativism, which I think is the coolest movement right now that exists, with like Nathan Schneider as one of the really interesting thinkers there, and where you have people who are essentially saying, we need the platform, we don't need the company controlling the platform, we can control it ourselves.
There are positive things.
Yes, absolutely.
I guess we're out of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was extremely interesting.
Tack för att just du lyssnar på Kodsnack. Om du vill stödja oss, varför inte tipsa en bekant om podden? Eller lämna en recension i till exempel iTunes eller något annat ställe där det går att sätta betyg på poddar. Du kan också stödja oss genom att köpa oss en kopp kaffe på Coffee, ko-fi.com/kodsnack. Alla pengar går direkt till att göra podden bättre och trevligare. Du kan också komma och hänga i vår Slack-kanal. Länk finns på kodsnack.se, precis som alla andra länkar och all annan info kopplat till varje avsnitt. Sist men inte minst finns det också en länk till vår Spreadshop-butik där du kan köpa tröjor och andra prylar med Kodsnacktryck. Återigen, tusen tack för att du lyssnar. Vi hörs.
Let me put it this way, Mr. Raymer. The 9000 series is the most reliable computer ever made. No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information. We are all, by any practical definition of the words, foolproof and incapable of error.